let me see if I get this right. The knowing field, if I'm understanding this correctly, is sort of a, oh, I guess sort of a bubble of information where people from the other side are, I don't know, allowed access, and we are allowed access back into. Is that so when the knowing field is open, they are able to communicate to us through the person who's standing in their place. Is that accurate?
For me, I tend to be careful when people are uncomfortable with terminology about ancestors and their active support. But I am also open and tell people this is my understanding of it, this is my experience of it. And it's certainly not everyone's, because we have different definitions. What I had heard one time that I love is we didn't all hear the same fairy tales. So I really appreciate other people's definitions and experiences, but that there is this opening that produces very relevant, very, you could say, therapeutic new information. That's absolutely true. That I have a belief or a sense or an appreciation that the ancestors are actually very actively involved is something that I do have to be open about. And perhaps because of that, folks who gravitate toward my workshops and trainings tend to be more comfortable with those definitions. But there are other ways of working in which there is a more linear definition of causality, I guess you might say. But yes, my sense is the ancestors are very busy, and sometimes even after the workshop, they're pulling out letters, and all kinds of really beautiful things have happened. And I will say that my sense, I often talk about the universal indigenous, because my sense is we all have these roots. We all come from that. We all are just minutes away from a time when, in whatever land we came from, our families, in a very ordinary way, included that and spoke about it. And I remember that I was in a different place, and really the group certainly did not have a background in terms of believing that ancestors could be participants. And this beautiful person told me that after the workshop, they went home and made a cup of tea. And she said, and then, you know, I've never done this before, but I felt so held by the ancestors that had helped me to understand something that I had never understood before. And I don't know what possessed me, but I got another cup. And I poured a cup of tea for my ancestors. And I had tea with my ancestors, just to say thank you. And so this was someone that it certainly wasn't a part of their paradigm, but when they were in a family systems constellation and had their work done, their own experience, it really shifted not just their concepts that were directly related to the place where they had difficulty and were stuck, but it sort of opened an opportunity for them long term.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a beautiful explanation. I understand exactly what you're saying, that there's a basic truth, and we all have different ways of explaining it. So thank you for going into depth with that. That's really helpful. Especially since what you're talking about, I can completely relate to this. I'm doing my own ancestral healing work, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be hosting this summit. But I had been stuck on one of my lineages. You know, I'm a genealogy freak. I'm obsessively on Ancestry.com all the time. And there was one lineage that I just couldn't break through, just 2 generations up. And I was just asking this lineage, please lead me in the direction I need to go. And then within a day or two, just boom, all of a sudden information showed up And now I've been able to follow this lineage back like 4 or 5 generations, and it went into a country I never expected, and this whole vast new world of information that now I have this deeper connection with this lineage that I never thought possible. And it was just basically what you were just talking about, just allowing the knowing field to lead me in the right direction. So thank you for that. Now, let me ask you, how did your own indigenous roots influence your work with family systems constellations?
Well, I have actually been working in the knowing field since I was 17. And that began for me when I started to have knowing dreams, which in my family is actually, perhaps you could say it's a matrilineal occurrence. It doesn't happen with everyone, but I began at 17 to have knowing dreams about things like people who would die and events that would happen. And it was actually really challenging. But I was in a mainstream educational system, and so there was a lot of concern, and this was really part of my foundation when I began to have dreams about knowing events. I had to go see the school counselor, and there was a lot of discussion about delusions and hallucinations and um, all of the different terminology that's available in psychotherapeutic fields for someone who has knowing dreams. So my mother, who really is a courageous person, decided rather than send me to the recommended psychotherapy channels, to send me rather to her mom, who had been a dreamer for most of her life. And in fact, she was my greatest mentor, and she lived to be well in excess of 100 years old, and really helped me to see that it was actually very ordinary that all of us come into the world with gifts, and gifts are to be of service. And so for that opportunity, I think I really had, um, I'm just forever grateful. So the knowing field and being comfortable with it, finding a way to take care of myself, finding a way to be able to separate what's mine, what belongs to someone else, all of those kind of hygiene techniques, perhaps you could say, uh, those really were a part of my foundation. And then as I worked early in life, I was fortunate, worked mainly with Native communities, and all of those things were considered very ordinary, just a regular part of life. Whenever I was outside of Native community, I became really aware that it was not considered ordinary, and lots of different definitions. Some people were frightened by it. Some people demonized it. Lots of different experiences that people had when it was not a part of their own culture and a part of their own upbringing. So I fell in love when I saw Family Constellation, because that for me was home, and that came when I was well into adulthood. But it has been a beautiful gift, because many of the protocols, many of the cautions, um, different discussions about humility, discussions about being sure that you're rested, many of those things that I think are actually a service to anyone in any kind of helping profession are particularly helpful when people are working with the knowing field. So when I particularly do trainings, I am teaching the structures of the methodology. And then I also have a sense that part of our responsibility as well, part of our opportunity as well, because of the nature of the work, is to encourage people to be really respectful and to take good care of themselves when they are walking in these places, where they really are standing with the ancestors or standing with the sacred, standing with a greater capacity for gifts and for knowing than often a person even knew they had. So for some folks, there actually is a kind of an awakening that happens with family constellation that is really secondary to resolving different family systems challenges. There, for many people, is this, you might call it a remembering that, yes, I do know how to see more than I've given myself permission to see, or I do have this ability to think about someone when they really do need a call or a prayer or encouragement. And it's been very interesting for me to see how many people have all of these different gifts and capacities that have been very much repressed or very much marginalized just out of our social conditioning. So I think it's a really lovely thing. And with all the beautiful programs, for instance, on the Shift Network, I think that it really is a time where many of us are remembering that we have really these incredible capacities to deeply connect with each other and to deeply connect with a kind of gratitude that can come from really having a sense of how many generations it took for me to be here. That is just mind boggling. That somehow life decided that this huge line of people actually had permission to survive long enough to pass life on for how many generations. So yeah, so I came to the work of the knowing field really as in my late teens, and then walked with it, and then to find it as a primary part of the toolkit in this really beautiful methodology was just one of life's big gifts, if not one of life's biggest gifts.